Hello and welcome to another episode of Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones. And Into the Afroverse is where we're taking Black folks into the future. On Into the Afroverse, I always start off. I always like to thank folks for tuning in and listening. I really appreciate the support. And I tell folks all the time, you can find episodes on YouTube, you can find them online, and of course, here on WOL 1450 AM 95.9 FM. Today, we are joined by Isis Asare. And for me, I reached out to Isis because I saw the work that was being done online, and I was really excited to see the things that were happening and so forth. So I really wanted to bring Isis on to kind of introduce her to you guys, if you're not familiar with the work. And Isis Asare is a queer Afrofuturist, a serial technology entrepreneur, can't wait to talk about that, and a lover of community, yoga, and all things Black culture. You can catch Isis zooming through cyberspace or in person, wherever Black folks gather. A citizen of the world, Isis was born to Ghanaian parents in Harlem. Isis concurrently resides in Seattle, Washington, and Oakland, California, with their supportive and evolving polycule. Okay, she's an alum of Stanford University, Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government, and Columbia Business School, where they earned a bachelor's degree in psychology, master's in public policy, and MBA, respectively. And with that, once again, I'd like to welcome Isis Asare. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you.
Excellent.
I'm excited to be here. I'm excited about this conversation. Thank you for having me.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. When I start these things off and we have people like yourself come on and talking about they're into science fiction, futurism, and things of that nature, the question always, we always launch with this question: how did you end up here? What brought you to this space? What was so inviting about it for you?
Wow. So I'll say science fiction and technology, and like my answer mirrors Octavia Butler's answer. But like technology usually pushes the boundaries of what's possible.
Mhm.
And in my mind, oftentimes create opportunities for historically marginalized people. So like people who historically did not have access to capital, women, people of color, etc. So that's always been my excitement about technology. And then for science fiction, it's a space where like all the social assumptions can be usurped. So your assumptions about women or blackness or like what it is to be a human are all twisted and tested. And that's very exciting to me as I think about what are new and innovative ways that I can interact with my community,
Mhm.
um, my society, and the world at large.
Excellent. In listening to your response, the first thing that occurred to me was, yeah, I do think that there's a particular appeal for science fiction when it comes to the Black community. And I don't think that it's talked about enough because for so long it was seen as something that Black folks were not a part of because we were primarily looking at films, looking at published works and so forth, and we were kind of kept out of those realms. I mean, we were always there and we talk about how Du Bois had written science fiction and things of that nature. And of course, we look at Black speculative fiction that can take us back even further. But I do think there's an appeal when it comes to science fiction and fantasy for Black folks, even though we don't necessarily, or we, just now recently really seeing ourselves in that space. What do you think it is in terms of that connection where Black folks are finding like, I don't know if you want to call it a safe space, but certainly a space in science fiction and fantasy?
Yeah, I agree to all of that. So one statistic that I listened to last night is that I think it's over the last 20 years or something like that. Only 8 movies has had a main character that was a person of color, and Will Smith is half of those characters. You're like, so when you look at that, like that internalization that science fiction is something that is not for people of color is definitely a message that has come from Hollywood and mainstream media for a long time. In addition, I read this in a fictional work. The first thing that oppressors do to oppress people is take away their space to imagine, to
Right.
reimagine the present, to reimagine the future. It's kind of like what you do with the baby elephant. You tie it down to like a little stump, and then it goes up to be an adult elephant, and you tie it to something small, and it's like just having a rope. It doesn't think like, oh, I can lift my foot and be free of this. And so science fiction and fantasy are spaces where like to be in those spaces, you have to imagine. You have to
Right.
step away from the everyday to engage in the story. And so it's a space where marginalized people can begin to exercise that muscle of imagining something beyond what is directly in front of them, or what are the stories that other members of society are communicating to us. And I think that is particularly healing to Black people.
Got you. Got
Or
you.
it's, rather, I should say, it's healing to myself as a Black person. I don't know what's healing for everybody else, but it's healing to me as a Black person.
I think given the growth of the Black presence in this space, it was only a matter of time before Hollywood and others figured it out. Like, wow, there are some Black folks out there that want to see these stories. There are Black folks out there that are telling these stories. And what I like is the unique spin that we bring to these stories, because there's really nothing new under the sun in terms of the stories that are being created. But when you bring in that perspective of Blackness, you get these different outcomes, or you get these different points of view that hadn't been considered. Like I always say, how many Tarzan movies can you make? So now that you're seeing the inclusion of Black directors, Black filmmakers, writers, and so forth, it's really interesting to see how we're expanding these horizons when it comes to science fiction and fantasy. For yourself, what have you been doing to actively be part of this community?
Yeah, so I just realized it's not in my bio. So I appreciate the bio, and then also I should have added, I'm the CEO and founder of Sister Sci-Fi.
Mm-hmm.
So Sister Sci-Fi is the first Black-owned bookstore focused on science fiction and fantasy in the U.S. That's been validated by the American Booksellers Association. And when I started Sister Sci-Fi, I wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna start the first Black-owned bookstore, science fiction and fantasy bookstore. I don't even know if I was clear. I wanted to start a bookstore,
Right.
but I did. I was learning about that intersection of Black culture and science fiction, particularly science fiction at the time, right? And that would expand to fantasy. And I didn't want anybody else to miss the memo. I was like, it's so rich. There's so much excitement going on. I want to talk to people about these books. I want everybody to know about these books. And
Right.
that was just Sister Sci-Fi. So it's like, it's a confluence of like gender identity, racial identity, and the identity around people interested in science fiction and fantasy, and reimagining a very different set of hypotheses for the future.
Excellent. And how can folks find your bookstore? Is this a brick and mortar? Is this virtual? How can they find it?
Well, William, I'm very happy you asked. Historically, Sister Sci-Fi has been located in cyberspace. So on the website, on all the social media, is Sister Sci-Fi, and Sister is spelled Sistah, and then Sci-Fi is SCIFI. And then we launched 3 Sister Sci-Fi book vending machines. So 2 are in the city of Seattle, Washington, and 1 is in downtown Oakland. So yeah, those are all the ways you connect. So in cyberspace,
Right.
get on your spaceship, also known as your cell phone. Find us on all the things, or like you can find a Sister Sci-Fi book vending machine in person. And we do a lot of virtual events. And as we head into the fall and into 2024, I am really leaning into in-person events.
Okay.
I'm considering we're in a post-pandemic world, knock on wood. So
And what's been the response? Because I really love the idea of the vending machines. What's been the response to this work?
yeah, I'll answer that in two parts. So what's been the response of like the existence of sister sci-fi in general?
Hmm.
I think a lot of people who identify as Black, but also identify as science fiction and fantasy nerds are like, yes, there's a whole community
Right.
of us, right, who didn't, who aren't already connected in the space, right? So you grew up in Sacramento, you loved A Wrinkle in Time, and everything associated with like fandom, right? And we're always continuously the only one. And then you find sister sci-fi and you're like, oh my God, I'm not the only one. They're like tens of thousands of us, like
Right.
just in the US at this moment. Um, so I think it's that sensation of feeling seen has been the response. Like, I'm so happy you exist. I feel really seen. So that's an existence. I think there's also a deep appreciation for the curation, which is a two-way street. There's stuff that I find and introduce to the community, and the community is also really good about introducing stuff to me that sits at that intersection of science fiction and fantasy and Black and Indigenous culture. Because I think a lot of times it's like, if I'm going to do science fiction and fantasy, then the cultural stuff has to fall in the
Right.
background, or vice versa. If I want to like read or consume media that is really tied into Black and Indigenous culture, and I have to leave the science fiction behind. So I think people are often surprised by like the number of titles and the subjects that we can talk about on social media. And what I like to remind people, like when I first started, people were like, oh, because there's not a lot in the space. I was like, no, there's like a lot.
Yes.
And like what I'm talking about and what you see on Sister Sci-Fi is probably like 1/10 of the available content that has been made, that is currently available. Like this is like a small drop in the bucket. And I think there's like just an excitement, like, oh my God, there's so much out there. So that's about the existence of sister sci-fi. With the sister sci-fi book vending machines, a lot of times people are like, "Oh my God, I've never seen this before." Like, this is the first. I'm not the first to do it, unfortunately, or fortunately.
Right.
Penguin Random House launched book vending machines in London like over 100 years ago. They used to put them in the tube station, and you could get like paperback books while commuting. The company that I worked with has launched thousands of book vending machines, but primarily in schools. So I'm one of the few executions of book vending machines for commercial use, to my knowledge, in the US. Not the only,
That's
but one of
right.
the few.
Right. And if there's a business out there, a business owner that's listening, and they want to get one of your vending machines into their establishment, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, that is a great question. And I love when I get those emails because usually it's the other way. So the number one thing I'm looking for is that like, does the establishment have traffic? Right. Um, so ideally anywhere between 100 and 300 patrons a day.
Okay.
Does the establishment have like good hours? That mean like, are they open in the evenings or weekends? At least some evenings and
Mhm.
most weekends. Um, and do they have the ability to help me co-host events, right?
Got you.
That will build the sister sci-fi community. And if all
Got
those answers are yes, I would love to talk to them. Right now, the first three locations that do really well are high traffic coffee shops, um, museums, so either science museums and space centers, or Black and Indigenous museums. My next the next frontier are airports. So if
you. Oh
anybody has a
wow.
contact at an airport and wants to like make a sister sci-fi big vending machine happen, that's a dream come true. So
Oh, that
yeah.
would be awesome. So yeah, you folks heard it. If you have some contacts at the airport, you meet the criteria, and you have a business, please make sure you contact ISIS. So
Or like a museum league, because museums
yeah.
are also
Oh,
amazing.
definitely. Yes,
So
museum
thank you for
community out there. So
yeah.
yeah, so make sure you reach out to her. And if you're just joining us, this is Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones. And Into the Afroverse is we're taking Black folks into the future. And today we are joined by Isis Asare. So you're talking about these vending machines that you have and so forth. Let's say I'm a brand new reader to science fiction. I'm Black and I'm trying to find something to kind of get me started, or if I know someone that's into it, I want to give them a gift. What would be, and I know it's going to be hard to pick because you have so many books and so on and so forth, but what would be something that you think would be a good introduction or a good gift for someone to get them started? If you have a couple of titles and you want to tell us about those, go right ahead.
Yeah. Wow. So those are two very different
Right.
scenarios. So one, if you're looking for a book for yourself and you're trying to get started, I break it up into two categories. One, if you're looking for something classic that everybody's read, right, or
Mm-hmm.
at least knows about, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you want the cocktail party book. I would recommend Parable of the Sawyer by Octavia Butler.
Mm-hmm.
It's super relevant. It made the New York Times list for the first time in 2020. Yeah, 2020, which is almost a decade after its original
Right.
publication. And particularly in the height of the pandemic, it was just really relevant and
Yes.
prescient. So if you're looking for something classic, I recommend that. If you're looking for something contemporary and very Black and super queer, but still is emblematic of the big themes of Afrofuturism, which is looking into the future, but also pulling into elements of our Black cultural past. Um, I love recommending In Kindness of Ghost. It's usually something people have not read, right? No,
Right.
even people who have read extensively in the genre. It is a heavy book, so don't like, oh, I'm gonna sit by the pool and read this. It's not that book. If you're looking for a book that is speculative fiction, but more historical fantasy, and that's light and that feels good, but is still very emblematic of like the broader themes of Afrofuturism, then I recommend The Monsters We Defy by Leslie Penelope. She's also DC based. Um, so yeah, so those are my three recommendations for somebody new to the space. If you're looking for a gift for somebody, the crux is getting some stuff they would love
Right.
and don't already have.
Right.
So most science fiction and fantasy fans, particularly in the literature, love Octavia Butler, but most do not have Parable of the Sawyer, the graphic novel, um, edited by John Jennings and Damian Duffy. So that's always something I recommend.
Right.
It's really nice. I have it in hardcover. You can get that. There's also the Bitterroot Omnibus.
Mm-hmm.
This is also graphic omnibus edition. Sister Sci-Fi has signed copies. It's being adapted to television. People love it
Yeah.
once they read it, but it's not like so widely known that
Right.
your friend would already have it. You know what? Oh, and then of course I would recommend the Sister Sci-Fi Black Author List tea. That's just the same as plug. But like sci-fi fans, particularly in the literature space, love having that list of
Mm-hmm.
Black authors, and like it starts a conversation. And that's a shirt that, like, regardless of your ethnicity, like you can
Right.
wear. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. And yeah, we actually had John Jennings on the show a while back. Yeah, great work that he put out, bringing Octavia Butler's work to the graphic novel world. And when you mention Octavia Butler, you talk about the way she has become that much more recognized, and I'm so glad that it's happened. I mean, without giving too much away, because I don't know what folks have read, but she pretty much nailed it. When you talk about that, she comes to prominence in 2022 for those folks like kind of being introduced to her. It's no wonder, because when you read it, it's like just so eerie how
Yeah.
she's able to nail down and nail it, like she knew what was coming. I've seen signs at different protests. They say, Octavia was right, and things of that nature. So folks are out there listening. If you read that book, you'll know exactly what we're talking about once you complete it. So in terms of your interests and what brings you to this space, was this something that you always had an interest in, even as a child? Was there some turning point that kind of opened you up to this world? How did you, once again, like, how did you get here?
You're like, let's answer this question for some people like who are tech people are like, yeah, and I was given a computer right out the womb. I don't remember that. I don't remember that part.
Right.
Um, but I know, like, I grew up in Houston, Texas, and there are just like a lot of like science and engineering programs. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
remember spending the summers like at different coding camps. I can't remember what language they were teaching us, and so forth. So there was always like the underlying assumption, regardless of what you're doing, technology will be a part of it. I did not go on to become like a software engineer. I tried in college and I was like, I'm gonna have to leave this for somebody else. But I was always still like fascinated by like how technology can create literally like new worlds. So
Right.
I don't know like if I have like the defining answer to that. But what I would say is that like I always loved technology, and then becoming aware of the economic disparity, I was like, technology and entrepreneurship are the tools that I'm going to lean into. At the time, I was really focused on economic development, particularly in West African countries. Um, and then that led to me having a corporate career in tech, and then falling in love with like e-commerce because it's a great way to foster entrepreneurship,
Right.
and it's a great tool to like connect marketplaces across the diaspora
Mhm.
and bring consumers brands that have meaning and impact. I feel like there's no bigger way to change the world than with like your pocketbook, and the messages that those are communicating, and then from all of those passions and intersecting points, Sister Sci-Fi was born. So
Gotcha. Gotcha. And in your description, you describe yourself as a serial technology entrepreneur. So, in addition to Sister Sci-Fi and the book vending machines, what other projects have you worked on? What else have you done in addition to the things you already mentioned?
So before Sister Sci-Fi, I started and sold
Mhm.
two other entities. Some had more success than others. So one was Sister Cinema. Um, yeah, they're very different. So
Right.
Sister Cinema was an in-person and online platform that highlighted queer women of color cinema. So I think I ran that for like 5 or 6 years before I
Wow.
sold that, and had partnerships with like Indie Flicks, and other streaming platforms. And then at the height, we had events at 10 cities in the US and internationally.
Oh, wow. Excellent. And I'm sure folks are listening, and there are probably people out there that with similar interests, similar passions, and want to walk in those steps, so to speak. How do you move your passion, your love for science fiction, fantasy, Afrofuturism? How do you move it from something that you enjoy, something that you love, into the success that you just mentioned, finding these partnerships and turning it into a business entity? Is there anything that you could recommend to us to kind of put people on that path?
Yeah. So I mean, it's a work. So what I want to say, it's a work in progress, and I do not have all the
Right,
answers. That's number one. So number two, what has worked for me thus far is like you said it before, you found me on social media.
right.
So like for me, community building and social media is a skill that I learned from the first business, Sister
Mhm.
Cinema. Um, so yeah, so like for me, having a clear message and repeating that message over and over again eventually connects me to people that I hope create valuable connections with. So that's the first one. Two, I try not to do anything um, in a silo, right? So if I'm hosting an event, there's like that moment of like, who else would be excited about and intrigued by this event beyond the attendees, right? Like, who should I be partnering with? So, is it an author? Is it a publisher? Is it a filmmaker? Is it the event space? Um, and more than just like, I have an event, I need a sponsor, but like, I'm having an event. I think this is how I can add value to you, and this is what I'm hoping the value is, that you can provide for my organization and that community, in my community. So that's number two, like really having an intentional spirit of collaboration. And number three is I spent a lot of time like emailing people, like going online, going to websites, finding the email address, and emailing people and introducing myself to whatever project, um, and whatever project that I'm working on. So maybe like that particular project may not be the one, but they know of the work in general. And so if an opportunity does come up to collaborate, I'm more connected. So I would say those three things.
Excellent. Thank you. So once again, if you're just joining us, this is Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones. And Into the Afroverse, we're taking Black folks into the future. And we're joined today by Isis Asare. When you talked about this role that science fiction plays for Black people, allowing them to expand and talking about how one is controlled by lack of imagination, what do you think in terms of the responsibility of the science fiction writer, the creator, be it film, be it a graphic novel, whatever the case might be? Because oftentimes we talk about Black creativity. There's oftentimes this discussion and this debate. Are we creating for creative sake? Are we creating for entertainment purposes? Are we trying to deliver a message? Uh, do you see it as something that there's a responsibility that we have, or is it just, hey, I love this stuff, I'm creating it, I'm gonna put it out there and see what happens?
Yeah, wow. That is such a powerful question. And I'm like, now I got to go back and listen to the John Jennings. Like, did you ask him that question? Um, so I'm going to answer this question
Mhm.
as a consumer of
Okay.
media and not as a creative. Um, I think art across all different media, so movies, music, books, etc., um, can offer communities, can offer Black people a chance to heal. It can also allow us to sit further in our trauma, right? Um, and for me, art that allows for healing, that allows for reflection, that allows for growth is really powerful, right? That is not the only art that is of value, but for me, that art is really powerful. Um, and and I resonate to creators that allow for that reflection, like we talked about John Jennings and we talked about Octavia Butler. And I think about that like with everybody from like Erica Badu to Janelle Monáe, where like their music kind of taps in, or like their art taps into all parts of me and allows me time for reflection and ultimately for growth. Um, and there are lots of reasons why artists make work that are outside of that. And I guess like as a consumer, I ask like, why?
Right, right,
Right. You know, but but there's no judgment. I just know I gravitate towards art created with intention,
right.
that's multifaceted and creates the space for healing and for learning and for growth.
Excellent, excellent. And as a creator, what do you think? Do you think that this is something that creators should be cognizant of? Kind of just go with the flow. What do you think in terms of being a creator?
It I think why I answered it as a consumer is like I don't consider myself a creative. So I'm like, it feels very like I think
I got
creators should do
you. Right,
that. I mean,
right,
like, if you ask me, I think all creators should be creating art that facilitates healing and growth, that
right,
like informs as well as offers a
right,
compelling story. And like none of us should be doing, you know, the comfortery and all that kind of stuff,
right,
like right.
right.
Um, and I know that this is easier said than done,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
So
because and this kind of leads to the next question. Because right now, once again, as I mentioned, folks that are paying attention, if this is your thing, you're just seeing like this explosion of Black science fiction, fantasy. You're seeing Black characters and represented in all types of medium. What would you say, based on your experience as a consumer, as a reader, is there anything that we should be leery of, if anything? Because then the reason why I pose that is because, once again, using history as a guide, all too often when we see Black creativity and we see it as a vehicle of healing, as a vehicle of information, that when that corporate interest comes in, you know, when other folks start to recognize it, or perhaps even feel threatened by it, and we're certainly seeing that in terms of the way people responding to certain images and stories and so forth, big screen, small screen, books and like. What should we be leery of? Is there anything that we should be on the lookout for that we should try to avoid as this continues to grow and expand and morph into various things?
Yeah, that is a powerful question. Um, and I ask myself that a lot.
Mhm.
Um, and I'll start with I was listening to a discussion last night, and one of the panelists was Stephen, Dr. quote unquote Dr. Love, who's the producer of They Clone Tyrone. And he was talking about the themes in the movie. It's like the biggest theme is like there are pinnacles of Black culture. And when we as a community lose control of that, they can become weaponized against us.
Right.
And those pinnacles being, religion, music, food, etc. And that's the same for like as there's more representations of Black people in speculative fiction, Black people in science fiction and fantasy, right? If we if we fall into the trap of like taking Black characters and putting them in white roles, such as like the great white savior,
Right.
or like the lone valuable person who's going to rescue all of us and step away from some of our traditional norms of working in community, of like paying homage to like the ones who came before us, right? Just
Mhm.
things that are core to Black culture, um, moving in harmony with the earth, right?
Right.
From moving from our highest parts, like losing sight of that can allow representation of Blackness in science fiction and fantasy to be weaponized as anything else, falling into the trope. And I think they address that well in Black Panther One, falling into the trap that only the wealthiest, most successful, and most educated of us are valuable, right? Which is what we see of like Black Panther, and you have Killmonger like, what about the rest of us?
Right.
What about the ones of us who are left behind? And that's a powerful question, and we have
Yes.
to even in fiction.
I like that. I like that. So in terms of, let me ask you this. What are you watching right now? What has caught your attention? We talked about the books, we talked about, the printed word. What's capturing your attention on the big screen or small screen? Or any recommendations that you have?
We talked about They Clone Tyrone.
Hmm.
I watched The Blackening, which
Hmm.
is so funny. I watched The Blackening with friends. I'm really excited to watch The Angry Black Girl and Her Monster.
Hmm.
Um, I've talked a lot about I Am Virgo by Boots Riley.
Yep.
I loved Sorry to Bother You. Um, I want to watch Foundation.
Hmm.
Uh, I watched this Brazilian fantasy show on Netflix that
Hmm.
nobody talks about, but was so good. I can't remember the name of it. I really enjoyed it. Um, it's, yeah, it's not like totally Black, but they
Right.
bring in like traditional Brazilian lore, which is a very like mixed culture. And then also like in the second season, there's lots of representation of like um, native Brazilian cultures,
Hmm.
which I thought was very fascinating.
Hmm.
Um, What other, if you can't tell, I watch a lot of television.
No, it's fine.
Yeah. I started watching Power on Amazon
Hmm.
Prime Video, but I didn't finish. Um, and I'm very excited about Changeling,
Yes.
the TV adaptation by the book by Victor Laval. And I literally cannot wait for the other Black girl. Like, I'm like, when
Yes.
is September? I think it's September 13th. I was like, when is it coming? Who am
Right.
I watching it with? Um, so I read the book, I loved it, and I was just like, I'm talking to the publisher. It's like, I don't know about anybody. Can I get my book signed? Like, I bought a copy of the book. Can I get my book signed? So I'm very excited I was like, how'd she get this book published? Anyway, so those are the things that I'm watching
So
right
there
now.
you go. We got some book recommendations. We got some film recommendations for you guys. You know, we talking about Afrofuturism and this idea of envisioning and creating a future for ourselves. In your opinion, how can this work help us navigate when it comes to specific areas to, you know, in this current time that we're in, where politics is, you know, all the news right now, following the election, what's going on with Trump and the indictments and all of that. We look at the shifts that are taking place economically. We look at what's going on in the environment. Folks want to debate what's happening, but we can all see what's happening. Is there any place for Afrofuturism to assist us in kind of navigating all of these different spaces? Everything from education, because we see what's happening there in places like Florida, where they're literally trying to change the history right before our eyes, and unapologetic in doing so. Like, it's just, they're out in the open. What do you think, and how do you see all these things that you're a part of, Afrofuturism, science fiction, fantasy? Is there a way for these things to help us navigate through through these areas?
Yeah, most definitely. So I'm gonna give my response. I definitely want to hear your response if that's
Mm-hmm.
okay. I don't know if I'm
Yes.
allowed to, but um, what Afrofuturism, what Black speculative fiction, what Black fantasy, what Black science fiction offers is a space to have those conversations,
Right.
or at least for me, outside of academia,
Right.
right? So when you talk about how can we as a Black community respond to what's going on in Florida, I refuse
Right.
to speak of or think about that particular politician,
Right.
right? Um, we can go to the themes that are discussed at length and like uprising and community building in science fiction and fantasy. And I mean, people are like, well, why don't we just read history books, right? And that's a valuable source of information, but science fiction and fantasy allows us to think a bit more expansively, right? Um, and to like really step away, like to look at and examine our limited beliefs. Like I think a lot of times something happens and it's like the first thing that comes up for me is like, oh, I'm so powerless,
Right.
right? And then like I can read a book by like River Solomon and In Kindness of Ghosts and read like a character who like has a very similar background than me and is also very far removed from like centers of power in her society and how she was able to find a voice and find strength and facilitate change, right? Um, Same thing for like climate justice and how climate fiction can speak to that. So like N.K. Jemisin, I can't believe we've been talking for so long and I'm
Right.
just now saying N.K. Jemisin. N.K. Jemisin, the Broken Earth trilogy, there are a lot of great themes in that from motherhood to like how people like will stigmatize you as you have access to power. But the biggest thing is like the protectors of the environment in the story are deemed as dangerous, right? As opposed to like being integrated fully in the community
Right.
and their resources and their truths acknowledged. And then we see what happens when what happens is that the world ends, right?
Mhm.
um, and like reading that trilogy as a cautionary tale,
Mhm.
right? In a world literally navigating a fifth season, and how we all have a role and responsibility and need to be like, need space to show up whole. Um, so that's political activism, that's climate justice. So yeah, so I would say in general, Black representations in like science fiction and fantasy allows a space for us to deal with our limiting beliefs so that we can mobilize effectively.
Oh, okay. I like that. Yeah, and you know, for myself, I look at um the current state of the world and the way that we view it. And I think people really underestimate the power of storytelling.
Mm,
And the way I see it is what we believe this world to be currently are primarily the stories that we believe, not necessarily the reality, but the stories that we believe. Our perceptions of ourselves, you know, we especially be talking about the negative perceptions of Black folks. These are stories that are just constantly being told that we just came to embrace and internalize because we kept hearing the same story over and over again. May not necessarily match up with the data, may not match up with the reality, but we believe the story. When we look at the current state of politics and people are taking one position or another, most often that is because they bought into the story that that particular political point of view tells them. Once again, doesn't matter what the reality is. As you mentioned in Florida, they're literally recreating reality before our eyes. And they're going to tell that story. If folks are not careful in Florida and across the United States, they're going to retell that history, retell those false stories over and over again until it becomes reality. So to go back to your point, what I like about Afrofuturism, because yes, I'm a historian, but not everyone's in the history books, you know. For some folks, they can see it, just be turned off by it. But when you look at Afrofuturism, science fiction, fantasy, and so forth, these are folks that are well informed, these creators. That's where these stories are coming from. They're pulling from the history, they're pulling from the culture to create these stories. So as these stories are getting told, and it is so important in terms of representation that they be done properly, because these are the stories that we're going to embrace and internalize. So we start to hear these stories over and over again. That'll begin to change our perception. And for folks that don't necessarily agree with that, all you got to do is look at the uproar when you had a Black woman playing a mermaid. You know, I I just remember white mermaids from as far back as I can remember. You get one, and it causes this uproar. Why? Because now you're changing the story. Now you're perhaps, going to tell a new story over and over again. We are these fantastic creatures. We are these fantastic beings. So I think that too is part of it. And of course, to the economic side, this is $1 billion industry. And for us as consumers, I think it's important to support those folks that have been writing and representing us correctly from the beginning without being told what to do, without having to be, enlightened, and also to support people like yourself that are working to bring these stories out. So what role do you see in creating this better future for Black folks?
Like, what role do I play?
Mm-hmm.
Oh wow. So one, I love the power of like you harkening back to the power of storytelling because that's massive.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what role do I play? There's like,
I mean, I have my ideas of what role you play, but I'm
yeah, I was like, I'm like, I don't know. And I'm just like, what is going on right now? Yeah, let's hear your idea while I get my life together.
well, I will say the role that I see you playing is the reason why I asked you to be on the show. You know, um, you're bringing these stories to the masses. You're perhaps introducing these stories that people may not be familiar with. And once again, I think that that is a powerful thing. I think the works that you've cited, the works that are in your vending machines that are part of your cyberspace, these are vital and important stories. And we always assume or we take for granted that this is just going to be here, that these books are going to exist, they're going to be read. And we're seeing right before our eyes, that's not necessarily the case. Folks can take these things from you if you're not careful. So for you to be this repository, this library of Afrofuturism, science fiction, and fantasy that focuses on and speaks to Black folk, I see you as being like carrying us into the future in a way. And I'm looking forward to the day, 5, 10, 20, 100 years from now, where someone can go back and say, it's because of the work that ISIS did that I was introduced to this. And I'm thinking the way that I think because of the way that Isis introduced me and what Sister Sci-Fi has done. So, like I said, that was like what actually said, hey, I want to see, I want to talk to you and bring you on this show because, like I said, we take these things for granted, and folks need to realize this is not a given that you'll just be able to go somewhere and pick up a book. It's not a given. So that's my take on how I see you playing a role in the future.
Yeah. Wow. One, thank you for that. I feel very
Mhm.
seen. Um, and I think I could have sat here and thought about that question for like an hour, and I don't think I would have come up with such like um, a response that resonated so deeply. So one, thank you for that. Um, yeah, I mean, I see myself as a professional cheerleader of Black creators. I'm like,
Like
if
that.
Black people created something, yes, yes, yes.
Right.
Um, and when I wake up, I'm like, in the morning, like, how can I get a bigger microphone? How can I
Right.
get a bigger phone? How can I make the stage bigger so I can like glow up more Black creatives? And just be more back because the work is so powerful and there's so much great work, right? Um, and it makes my name when like somebody's like, I found this book because of the Instagram page. They're
Exactly.
like, a librarian will be like, yeah, we look at this display inspired by it. I was like, okay, come here for it. Or like a high school teacher will be like, yeah, well, I introduced this to my class because of what I saw on Twitter. Um, yeah, yeah. And then just also allowing people to really sit with and process and think about the themes that a writer has painstakingly put into the work. I'll go back to The Monsters We've Defied by Leslie Penelope because you're a history buff.
Right.
It's set in DC. It's set in like 1920s DC, and it's based on historical facts. And I think that's something that you probably talk about on the show a lot. Like science fiction and fantasy is fictional, but it's not made up. Like
Right.
the writers still have to do extensive research
Yes.
to like build the world and put together a compelling story. And I love having those conversations and acknowledging that work. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. We have these great conversations, the time goes so quickly. And the show has actually moved from 30 minutes to an hour. So we were on air for like a year, and now it's being expanded to an hour. And it's because folks are listening, they're enjoying what they're hearing. So you're actually one of the first to actually go into this hour. So Sister Sci-Fi is taking us another step into the future. So congratulations on that. Uh, as we're moving to the end of this interview, once again, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed this exchange. And at any time, if you want to come back and talk about some new projects you're working on, more vending machines going out, whatever the case might be, you are more than welcome to come back to into the Afroverse. Uh, Final thoughts. What would you like to leave us with?
Um, So one, it sounds very simple to say, but you've seen the black and white billboard. There are black people in the future, right? So that's a given. And so then the next step is as a community deciding what that future looks like, right? And not just like for me, Isis, for you, William, for Keisha, for Tyrone, right? But what does it look like for us as a community in the US, for us as a community across the diaspora, for us as a community as we interact with other communities. Um, and to have an intentional answer for that, we need to continue asking ourselves that question in the present, much in the way that our forebearers asked that question in the past. So
Excellent.
I think we're
No, that is
that's what I'm
awesome.
inspired to say.
That's a great answer. And one more
So
time, how can folks reach you? How can they find you?
yes, so it's Sister Sci-Fi, spelled Sistah, and sci-fi spelled sci-fi on all the things. So on the internet, on Twitter, on TikTok, on Threads, on Tumblr, on Pinterest, on YouTube, so on all the things. It's Sister Sci-Fi. Yeah, and that's how to connect with me out there in cyberspace. Um, at the Sister Sci-Fi Book Vending Machines located in Seattle and in Oakland, California. If you're trying to find locations or hours of operation, just shoot us a DM at a virtual event and hopefully more commonly at in-person events. Also, thank you for allowing me to join you into the Afroverse. This was fun. I really appreciate it. It was fun. It was thought-provoking and it was insightful. I feel seen. And so I thank you very much for the
Oh,
space.
wow. Thank you. I appreciate that. It makes me feel good to know that I can help folks be seen, because that's what we try to do here. So real quick, gonna just couple things. Are you a comic book fan? You mentioned graphic novels, comic book fan.
Yes. So, okay, do not judge me,
Okay.
right? So I started Sister Sci-Fi, and people were like, oh no, sis, you gotta read comic books,
Right.
right? Comic books, graphic novels, I mean, they're different, but so like me reading comic books is very new with my journey of Sister Sci-Fi. So I am a newbie in the space. Why do you ask?
Will there be comic books in the vending machine?
Oh, okay, okay. So the answer to that is yes. So
Okay.
Far Sector is currently stocked in the sci-fi sister sci-fi
Okay.
book vending machine. I think there may I think at one point LaGuardia, that's more of a kind of um comic book. So the answer to that is yes. And
Okay.
like based off of demand, like might switch it and have more comic books and graphic novels in the vending machine. So yes, yes to that.
Awesome. Awesome. So all you indie comic book creators out there, you're looking for a place to get your comic book scene, you need to hit up Sister Sci-Fi. And one last thing, you mentioned appearances. Do you have any upcoming appearances where folks can find you?
Um, so Sister Sci-Fi does a weekly wind down Wednesday. If you want to join, it'd be fun, but no pressure.
Excellent.
It's on Instagram. It's super chill. Like it's like having a couple of non-alcoholic wine with me and talking about all things Black speculative fiction. So that's on Instagram. That's every Wednesday. I took the break off for the summer. We'll be back next week. There is a virtual 30th celebration of the publication of Parable of the Sawyer. The panelists will be Adrienne Marie Brown, Ayana Jameson, and Daniel Simon, who is the editor for the book. And that'll be virtual. Details of that should be up and live next week. What other appearances? Oh yeah, there's a screening of They Clone Tyrone in Oakland. So I'll be part of the pre and mid movie discussion for that. Um, yeah, I'll stop there.
Excellent.
I was like, I feel like I should be saying other stuff, and I was
No,
like,
that is fine.
yeah.
So one more
Oh,
time.
let me just say one
Oh,
thing. And
please go ahead.
Litquake Out Loud in San Francisco. So I will be curating uh, Sisters Taking Root Amongst the Stars with Angela Dalton, who wrote the children's book To Boldly Go, How Nichelle Nichols in Star Trek of the Civil Rights Movement, and Aima the Dreamer, who is like this Afrofuturist hip hop artist based here in the Bay. So, and that's October 14th.
Excellent, excellent. So one more time, I just want to thank you so much for joining us. Like I said, the invitation is open. Anytime you want to come back, just let me know, because I'm sure folks would like to hear more from you and more about what you're doing. So yeah, that'll about do it, folks. This is another episode of Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones. And like I said, Into the Afroverse, we're taking Black folks into the future. People always ask, what can they do to support the work that we do here? Please visit the website, afrofuturismnet.com. You can go click on that donate and you can help us out. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, you want to listen to past episodes, go to the YouTube page, Afrofuturism Network. Be sure to like and subscribe. And of course, we're on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook under Afrofuturism Network. So one more time, thank you to our guests and have a blessed day. Take care, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.